Welcome back to PLS 510. Today we're going to continue the segments that relate to the annual warm season grasses. In this particular segment, we're going to take a look at these warm season grasses, these annuals, one species at a time. We're going to start with forage sorghum, and the forage sorghum scientific name is sorghum bicolor. It's the tallest growing of the sorghums, and when we say sorghums, we mean everything from Sudan grass to Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan hybrids, and the forage sorghums alone, or just pure forage sorghum. It's the tallest growing, highest yielding of those. It is subject to lodging, in other words, falling over. Its use year in and year out is mainly for silage. It's usually used, and it is a one-cut crop for the most part. Dwarf varieties are available and that are more easily managed if we're going to graze them. BMR, or the brown midrib trait varieties, are available, and these are desired. This BMR is a outward expression. Brown midrib is a phenotypic or outward characteristic that means that the plant has lower modified lignin, which means it is more digestible than non-BMR sorghums to ruminants. Forage sorghums, like many of the annual warm season grasses, can accumulate toxic levels of nitrates under certain conditions. These typically are high nitrogen rate applications and drought, and their leaves contain cyanogenic glycosides, and by that mean the name of the cyanogenic glycoside is durin, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the disorders lecture. Let's take a second and just talk about the brown midrib trait that we have introduced with the forage sorghums, or at least brought into this lecture in the forage sorghums. The brown midrib trait is present in sorghums, and it's available for sorghums and in pearl millets. It is a genetic mutation that causes less or altered lignin, and it also means that that plant is higher in digestibility. In other words, a grazing ruminant can get more energy out of that plant. So therefore, it's a very desirable trait. There are many BMR varieties available, and you do not have to necessarily give up yield in order to get the BMR trait. So look for both high yield and the BMR trait when you pick a variety. Next, let's take a look to the Sudan grass and the sorghum by Sudan hybrids, oftentimes abbreviated S by S or SXS. The Sudan grass, a picture of Sudan grass is on the left. The sorghum Sudan is on the right. These are typically lower yielding and finer stemmed than the forage sorghums, but their stems can still be very hard to cure. They will have cyanogenic glycosides, which, as you will remember, is durin, D-H-U-R-R-I-N, but in lower quantities than with the forage sorghums. Their best use is for grazing, and they can provide multiple grazings per season, but they are also utilized as baleage, which is plastic wrapped, high moisture bales of hay that will then ferment. They can have nitrate toxicity and cyanide potential. The Sudan grass has the finest stems, the lowest cyanide potential, and is of the three, easier or the easiest to cure for hay. If you were strictly planting it for hay management, then going to a high seeding rate to get a thick stand is going to also limit the size of stems and then make it easier to cure. Third species third particular look we're going to take at the summer annual grasses today is pearl millet, or Pennisetum americanum. And Pennisetum americanum, or pearl millet, has a very characteristic cylindrical, tall, cattail-like seed head. And it's very easily recognized when it gets to this stage. The primary advantage of pearl millet, at least to many producers, is that it has no prussic acid potential. In other words, it has no durin in the leaf that can be converted to cyanide in the rumen. And many producers choose to use pearl millet for this one reason. Pearl millet oftentimes is medium yielding. In other words, it's not as much as some of the most aggressive or highest yielding sorghum Sudan hybrids. And again, its best use is grazing because the waxy stems of pearl millet make it very hard to cure. It's also commonly used for baleage. Dwarf varieties are available, and BMR varieties are available. But with the dwarf varieties, the internodes do not elongate, and therefore they do not get quite as high. The leaf number, of course, and the leaf is the highest quality portion of the plant. The leaf number is going to be the same for tall growing or short growing pearl millets. If we change gears almost completely in terms of the way this summer annual grasses are looking, then go to crabgrass. Crabgrass can be one of several species in the Digitaria genus. It is a regrowing annual with a creeping root habit. It is highly palatable, and it's best used for grazing, although you can make hay with crabgrass quite easily, although there are some reports that it is kind of slow or that it can be slow to cure. It will reseed itself, and typically the people who well-managed crabgrass, in order to carry over year to year, you will need to let it reseed itself by setting seed late in the season. It also, like pearl millet, has no prussic acid potential. Improved varieties of crabgrass have been available now for about 30 years. But it was quite a revelation back in the 1990s when R.L. Dalrymple at the Noble Foundation observed that there were ecotypes of crabgrass that grew very tall, that were very leafy, and that were very different than the prostrate crabgrass seen in lawns and turfs. These varieties are called Red River. That was the original improved ecotype. Now another one called Quick and Big and Mojo are commonly available. And you can see the picture of vegetative crabgrass on the upper right, and on the boot there in the lower picture are all of the seeds of crabgrass. It's a very prolific reseeder. Corn, which has the genus and species name Zea maize, is seldom considered a forage for grazing, but yet it can be. Corn is most often used in forage systems as corn silage, and it is an annual, providing one harvest of high-quality forage annually. If you were going to use it for cattle, the way it's commonly used, even though you wouldn't say it's common, and you would not find it that often, but people will pasture it. And here is what corn will provide to you that others of the summer annual grasses will not. Corn, in that green leafy stage or early ear stage, or even with the ear, can produce gains upward of 1.5 pounds a day on growing animals, even in late summer, and it's one of the few forages that can. It has high fertility needs. It's still corn. You're still going to have to apply nitrogen to grow the crop. And unlike the summer annual sorghums, you are going to probably put the nitrogen out just one time, much like you would if you were growing corn for grain at the beginning of the season. Whether or not corn is a highly profitable venture for grazing will depend on grain prices. People who do graze corn will do things like collect other people's seed corn from the year before and plant it for their purposes to save the cost of seed. And that will help keep the cost of production low, because really it is not the grain production that you're after. It is going to be the green forage production. It will result in high summer gains, and it's extremely good if you need to rotate from through and use this corn to rotate into something else and something better, because you can graze it off by late summer and then replant whatever your desired forage is. Teff, or Aragrostis teff, a scientific name, is used primarily for hay. Now this one I bet you have never seen, but yet it is, we have used it in Kentucky from time to time as an emergency crop that is very suitable for horses or ruminants, but in particular for horses because it has low water-soluble carbohydrates. And if you will remember back to an earlier discussion, horses, especially mature horses, can develop something called a metabolic syndrome, which is much like our human diabetes, where they are where they will have elevated blood sugar, and they just do not need to have high levels of sugar in their diet. And teff is a good forage for that. It is also good as a hay crop, and among the summer annuals, it may be one of the best for hay. It's quick to establish, it is very small seeded, and we get 1 to 2 cuttings per acre per year. And the last of our summer annual grasses in this section is foxtail millet. Many species that go into this, so I do not list a specific one, but it's a fine-stemmed annual, and you will recognize the characteristic seed heads in the picture on the right. It's a one-cut crop. It's used for pasture or hay, but hay primarily, or as a food crop for birds. And you will find it quite often seeded with soybeans to be harvested as haylage or baleage. It also has no prussic acid potential, but it can be detrimental to horses. It can produce the glycoside ceterion, and the bristles of the seed heads can cause mouth irritation also. This has been a quick overview of the several species that we can raise for summer annual grasses in Kentucky. Until next time, we'll see you then.